Yeah. Okay. I hope all y'all are doing well and have no, you know, bad things to report or have to think about that affect you or your family personally. I got a call from our friend at the Air Force Academy, and he won't be joining us tonight. They've had two suicides among seniors there in the last couple of weeks, and so they're doing a virtual retreat, I think, this afternoon to try to figure out, what sort of services or how to go about providing what they need, because it's it's a military academy, and uh, they do a pretty good job with services and pretty good job with dealing with student issues. But I guess when you're confronted by something that basically there's no script on and nobody else has really ever seen or had to deal with, it's some students may find it a bit overwhelming. So that was it was actually a concern that that had been surfacing around the country in terms of students that have challenges like food insecurities and housing insecurities, and needing to have that pat on the back occasionally from a mentor or a faculty member or whatever, and whether we'd be able to provide it or not. And so there is a sense that the rate of student suicides will spike up, and it's just part of what's happening here. But, but anyhow, I thought that was worth letting you know that there are people that are kind of off having to deal with those issues too. Um, on a personal sense, we there comes a time in your family's history where you sort of become the only one left working and the only one with a brain that knows how to function within all the systems out there. And so I had to spend a fair amount of time last week trying to get a few elderly relatives kind of organized and set up for the shutdown. And it's just what you have to do if you have to do it. And we had my wife's uncle who lived in California, passed about a week ago of they just set up a hospice care thing for him, and he developed a fever and had pneumonia and died. But he was extremely high risk. He was 99, and he was a World War II U.S. Army air ace. Had 13 confirmed kills and about as many unconfirmed kills in Europe in the Second World War. Was a test pilot for the big companies as they were developing jets and things like that, and then spent some time with one of those alphabet agencies that nobody can really talk about, spending some time around the world, and then ended up really as just kind of a one of those legends. And in what was it, 1953, he participated in the first air combat fight among jet planes over the Yalu River in Korea. So, this is a guy who had a huge life, had a big life, and lived to be an old, quite an old man, 99. It's pretty sharp up until last year or so, and so sorry to see him go. And of course, we didn't even consider participating in the funeral or anything like that. So it's one of those deals you deal with. And there for a while, I thought we were going to have another couple that we're really good friends with, older couple, want to move into our house, into the spare bedroom, but we managed to cut that catastrophe off at the pass. But you know, it was one of those where if it pushed to come to shove, we'd said, sure, come on in. Yeah, plenty of room. Just, you know, don't breathe on me, don't cough on me, don't touch anything I'm going to touch. In fact, never leave the guest room. You don't have to. You got everything back there. So, but we ended up not having to do that. So this past week was from a personal sense, was a bit of a overwhelming week. And so anything I promised that I would get done this past week that I didn't get done, I'm not going to apologize. Just, you know, stuff happened. I did manage to get up the readings for next week on the notions of gender and the greedy institution sort of notion. A little bit more time spent on that. I did not get feedback to you, but I will do that in the next day or two, and you've still got about a week until that first draft of that little piece is due. But it things just got out of hand. We had to postpone 2 doc students into the next spring semester. We had to extend them out an extra semester because they will not be able to collect data. And that's one of the drawbacks of doing survey data and things like that for dissertations, is that if something happens, and God forbid, you know, something like this happens, you just can't collect it. You can't collect the data because everything's shut down. And so you have to kind of either retool and figure out how you're going to get data, or you have to wait. And in both these cases, we're just going to have to wait. So we'll kind of see how that plays out. That's the only things that have occupied me in the last week. So I guess everything else is just a matter of, like everybody else, on full shutdown and sheltering in place, getting a little stir crazy and walk longingly by the wine rack on occasion, and know that you have to show some restraint there. But wait until the weekend. No, never mind. So how was your week? Did you have any big surprises out there? Anything kind of blow up? Any issues that you had not expected to see? Or any interesting issues you had not expected to see? I'm sure there were a lot of issues you had not expected to see, but okay. Well, how about we talk about culture just a little bit. I put up 2, well, one of them is not such a small reading. And once I realized how big a reading it was, I did not put the chapter up that I had also intended to put up, because I assumed that was would be a more than Herculean task to try to work through all that. So at least I'm hoping you got a chance to read the little short piece on Amazon and got to read, you know, the first bits and pieces of the article, the other article on culture, because it is, you know, it is something that kind of plays into how you organize institutions of higher ed, but it also plays in how you manage institutions of higher ed. So it's kind of in between organization and management, this sort of understanding of culture. And a long time ago, you know, I pulled some definitions out of the longer piece I gave you, I guess for a course I did, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. And then I went back and kind of looked at that again, and I realized that, you know, the reason I had used those short sections is that, you know, in my background and my training and my experiences of working in higher ed settings and kind of observing the way management occurs in higher ed settings, is that there are really two sort of broad definitions of culture. higher ed institutions. And so let me share up something here so we can offer you my perspective on that. Hopefully you got my overhead screen up there. For some reason it doesn't. There it is. There's the green thing finally showed up. It really kind of boils down to, to kind of one of two things. And, the first one, the one that we spend a lot of time with when we're talking about strategic planning, when we're talking about staffing, when we're talking about, issues related to the next initiatives that we want to deal with, or the next things that we want to get into, is sort of this notion of vision. And, in the longer piece I gave you today, they really define that in terms of shared values and beliefs. And, if you build an organization around a set of shared values and beliefs, and you have sort of this vision out there of what this institution wants to do and what this institution's all about, you can organize around that vision, and you can organize around sort of the strategic plan of how you might reach that vision. And if you think of vision as kind of a long-term thing, 3 years, 5 years out, something like that, then you realize that, from year to year, you have sort of a strategic plan that you're going to have to constantly revision and constantly retool, and make sure that all your decisions, and make sure all that your logistical sorts of moves that you might make are all built around a common vision. And all of those organizational elements that you might build, how organized they are, or how clustered, or how unclustered they are, or how siloed, or whatever. When you look at how you have built that institution, then every single decision you make has to, at some point in time, intersect with this vision. Now, I can offer you a little bit of insight. When I was at the community college, I had been working on a project with them for a couple of years before I went to work there. And it was this notion of figuring out how to make it more like a residential campus, more like a regular 4-year college campus, even though it was a 2-year institution. And, one of the things that we lacked was this idea of having, kind of a physical geographic focal point around which students could interact. And a lot of times campuses will have that central mall, or the central campus, or you'll have a building, the student union, or you'll have some other building that just basically is the focal point of student activity. And so when at the community college, when they come for class, or they've got, a break in between one class and another class, where do they go? What do they do? How do they, how you're wanting to develop a community. And that was part of the vision, was that we wanted this community college to develop a greater sense of community within its students and among its students. And so as we began preparing the kind of the thought process of how you go about doing that, we had two primary strategies that we kind of came up with, looking into the literature, looking at everything that we knew about how to create that sense of community on a campus. And one of them was to create like a shared outdoor space, like a mall, that had maybe a little shelter on it, but things like that. Well, in the center of this campus, because it had been built back in I guess the 60s or so, somewhere in the 60s, late 60s, maybe early 70s. The campus had been built in a typical model, which was a large parking lot in the center and the buildings on the outside of the parking lot. And then as it grew, it just kept building more circles outside of the central parking lot. And so you had buildings, 2 or 3 buildings deep around this central parking lot. And the parking lot began to make less and less sense, not to faculty, of course, because they like to be able to walk, 12 feet to their door or whatever. But it began to make a whole lot less sense because it was a prime opportunity to put a physical space there that students could organize around and could center around. And so one summer when the faculty left, we had solicited, some grant money, and we had solicited some permissions from the state to, kind of fiddle with the layout a little bit and all that sort of stuff. We basically took out the parking lot and put in an open mall in the center of campus. And we did it we had everything lined up, and we did it in 2 months. So by the time students left in the spring, if they weren't taking classes during the summer, and if faculty weren't teaching during the summer classes, they would get back in the fall semester, and where there used to be a parking lot, now there was this big lush green field in the middle of campus. And we asked the landscaper, we said, well, can you get really nice grass in there in that month and a half, 2 months? He said, oh yeah, that's not a problem. We'll sod it all in, but we'll use gorilla grass. I'd never heard the term gorilla grass before. But they brought this sod in, they put that sod in, and within 2 weeks, that stuff was a foot tall. And we had to go back through and mow it about every other day, and it was kind of stiff on top and all like that, but it was a big green space. And you would be surprised when we got back in the fall, students didn't need to be told what to do. Suddenly there were, people laying out in the middle of the mall there on a blanket, enjoying the sunshine, having their lunch out there, throwing a frisbee around, throwing a football around. I mean, it was exactly what students had wanted, but not known that they had wanted, to create more of a community space. And outside of the grumbling and griping of a few faculty members that were walking further than they had to walk before, which really wasn't that far because we had parking lots on the outside of the rings too. And so all we did was take away the central parking lot. And the whole cost of that thing, and it was, I don't know, maybe, about the size of a football field, maybe, yeah, about the size of a football field. And the whole cost of that was like $80,000. Because we got some donated construction, guys that tore stuff up and, hauled that off and used it in another place, ground it up and used it for other purposes and things like that. So we were able to do that. And the other thing was to build a student recreational building, basketball courts and, all the things that go into rec building, weight rooms and things like that. Now that one was done after I left because it took, 3 years to basically fund that up. But we went to, the Board of Visitors at the state level and got permission to add, $5 onto, student tuition fees for a 3-credit class. And we collected, extra monies like that for 3 years. And at the end of 3 years, we had enough, cash balance in hand to be able to begin the construction. And within 2 years later, we had the rec facility up. And now students in the area there consider it not to be a community college, they consider it to be a 2-year college, even though it's still a community college, serves all the same purposes, but it also serves, a greater transfer purposes because there are 3 large institutions around, 4-year institutions. And so it's become, one of the really nice, successful 2-year schools. But it was because there was a vision there that we wanted to create the feel of a residential campus. And it was all vision. And then we kind of put a strategy together that sort of worked things out. And so it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money, although the rec building, pretty big price tag. But, once you figure out what you want to do, then you it's all about figuring out exactly how we're going to do it. But it was all tied directly to this vision of a more student-centered, more student-friendly, more residential feel to a community college campus. And has been very, very successful. And now other institutions in Virginia, there's several that have kind of modeled similar sorts of things. And they're much more like residential schools than they are, kind of sterile community college images. Not everywhere in the state, but, several of them that have, larger populations of students to deal with. So any questions, any thoughts about that sort of approach and the idea of vision? Now, the danger with vision is that it's hard to get everyone to come on board and to make a commitment to really concentrate on the vision portion. And because it's hard to do that, some places kind of don't want to fight that battle. And administrators very often walk away from that. But that's one way of going. And it works better with smaller schools. It works better with, schools that have perhaps a regional identification, a location identification. Very often they'll share a vision that the community has. Communities are often in today's times, maybe we've been interrupted by this thing that's going on now, but communities very often in today's times are aspirational in nature. They want to be more like communities they aspire to, or they want to regain a history that they may have once had, or they just may aspire to be something that they're not quite there yet. And so often communities will have aspirations. And so the vision piece, it can be picked up by the institution also. And so it's possible in a kind of a locational place-based format to use vision as your organizing idea. The other idea is what, for lack of a better term, we'll use the Rousseau term. And that's this idea of a social contract. And, Rousseau would define culture as, and this is basically who our founding fathers was spending a lot of time reading and listening to, but Rousseau would define culture as an agreement among a group of people, that there are certain behaviors that are acceptable. There are certain behaviors that are not acceptable. There are certain things that it's a governmental responsibility to do. And then there are other things that it's up to individuals to take care of. And the philosophers at the time, the political philosophers at the time, weren't calling it social contract. They were calling it agenda and non-agenda items. That a government or an institution has an agenda, and those are the things they're supposed to take care of. And for example, if you look at the Constitution, there are certain things that is charged to each branch of government. And their responsibilities are laid out, or at least initially were articulated in the Constitution, and have been, modified and expanded, and in some cases shrunken since then. But Rousseau called that a social contract. And, his notion was, as long as a majority of individuals across different bodies of people agree, and the way that the founding fathers decided to do that was through elections and political parties. But the way that society sort of arrives at this contract, or this list of items that are agenda or non-agenda, is really through the agreement and the acquiescence of the population. Now, you hear terms that are thrown around a lot that kind of refer to that, and in a political or legal sense, they don't talk about social contract. They talk about rule of law, because our guidelines and our let me see if I can get this crap out of the way. Bingo, there you go. Their guidelines, these accepted rules, norms, and practices that a society agrees on, which becomes the, sort of the foundation of their culture. The social contract, we refer to it very often as the rule of law, or what's the right thing to do. And that works as long as there is agreement, and as long as people are willing to accept it. Now, it doesn't require really a vision as much as it does an agreement. This is what we all agree to do. Now, we may not all like it, we may not all like it, but we agree to do it. And so often culture can be defined in an organizational sense through a clear set of rules, norms, and practices. Now, there was an institution in North Carolina. Let me get rid of the share. There's an institution in North Carolina that decided they were going to improve, or drastically improve, their College of Business. And they did that by approaching a high dollar, well-known business figure as a donor, and sort of courted that relationship for a couple, 3 years, the president and the incoming dean of the College of Business. And after 2 or 3 years, they got this individual agreed to endow their College of Business with I don't know, $5-6 million, which let them go out and hire people that they normally would not have been able to touch. And it also let them go out and put plans together to recruit students that would maybe be a notch or a half a cut above what they had previously. And they wanted this professionalism to pervade the college and hopefully the campus eventually, but at least they wanted to have this impact on the College of Business. And they've been very successful in recruiting really good students, really good faculty, really good researchers, and kind of building on this endowment using other industry folks that have kind of come on board. Now, it'll be interesting to see what happens to this strategy during sort of this impending recession, which, by the way, that's what we're impending, is a recession. Hopefully not a depression, but it's very least it's going to be a recession. But it is interesting that the very first thing the dean did was he sent out a memo to all faculty members and all staff members, and he defined business dress, and that you would show up for office hours and class anytime you're going to interact with other faculty, students, or people outside the institution in business dress. And for men, that meant shirt and tie, coat and tie. And for women, it meant professional business dress. And people laughed about that and said, well, you know, you can't do that. You can't do that. You can't do that. Well, the president and the dean pulled the faculty together, the College of Business, and laid out their notion of why they wanted to do that. What was it they were all about, and why they needed all of these particular rules and regulations and codes of behavior and all that. And you know, pretty quickly, most, if not all, the faculty got on board, and the ones that didn't get on board are kind of no longer around. And they've hired people that were willing to come on board with that. And you know, so it was a way of defining themselves based upon these rules and norms and behaviors that they wanted to use to identify themselves as a you know, very business-like, rigorous college of business. And they've been pretty successful with it. We'll see how it holds, but you know, it's been going on for about 5 years, and there have been some blowback, and they've, you know, there have been some issues about donors that may have wanted to have an impact on curriculum and things like that, and they had to sort through all the academic freedom issues and all that sort of stuff. But they've, you know, they've managed to make that revision to their College of Business, and so far has been fairly successful. And so we'll, once again, I'll say we'll see. Are you all familiar with that? Or are you aware of, you know, that particular model having been done in North Carolina? Yeah. Okay. Well, look at High Point. Look at High Point and look at their College of Business. And you'll see, you know, their College of Business is kind of this, is this example. And, you know, it's going through a little shakeout period now, but they've, you know, they made a commitment. That was how they were going to do it, and they were going to make it work. And so far, they've been reasonably successful with it. Any of you have any experience, connection with High Point? Have you been down there in recent years, seeing what's going on? Yeah, Amanda?
I've actually taught there as an adjunct in the school communication for the past 5 years. I used to be an event manager. So they have underneath their school communication an event management practicum, which is interesting because they're now only one of 2 colleges that offer a 4-year degree where it's considered event management. But they have a mixture, at least in the school communication, that's been my experience, of tenured professors and then professors of practice. And I know that the president, Cobain, has been very big on bringing in like high profile individuals as speakers. Wozniak with Apple is considered a technology innovator of residence at High Point University. So he comes in twice a year and does lectures for students and talks to them about Apple and all those things. So at least from the school of communication, I've seen what they've done in terms of innovation. But I will say in terms of the quality of students there, there's a lot of potential, but there's the interesting challenge of the role that parents play at High Point University. There's a term there called VIFs, very important friends. So you have students who their parents are paying full tuition, and their parents are also making high-level donations of money while they're in school. So needless to say, VIFs, I've taught them before, get a different kind of treatment. And I've been, I had a VIF who got upset because they failed an assignment in my class. And then it goes up the chain. And then, because their father called well above even the department chair, we had to make sure the VIF was happy.
Oh, yeah.
Which, let them turn in the work. Don't let them, get an F, because they were apparently so emotionally traumatized by a 0 for not doing their. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good there, but I know people who work there full time, and through this whole crisis, they were still kind of focused on, we take care of the student, and they were not allowing a lot of full-time faculty there or staff initially to like step away if they had to deal with any of their own issues. You were there to focus on the student. So the interesting dynamics of being there full-time. My husband used to work there full-time for 8 years. So when you were there, you're expected to work like the president works. I will say he's very committed. He's great at what he does, but you're definitely, yeah, I mean, he works constantly, and that's what they expect of you. So it's a great place, but there's a lot of hard work that has to go in, and not all the time are faculty and staff appreciated for that.
Yeah. Yeah, when you do something like that, there's kind of a class structure that develops, and you have the older, I don't mean age-wise, I mean just older faculty and staff and all have been there, and then you have the new faculty and staff that are coming in. And if you are not real careful about how you do that, you end up creating this caste system almost. And it was kind of like when I'm not in the category of some of these guys, but when I took the job at App, I was told by the dean and by the director of the doctoral program in grad school that the reason they were hiring me was that they were looking for somebody with a lot of experience in research, a lot of experience in higher ed administration, someone that rather than taking a younger faculty and train them over time to do certain things and then have them walk away from it. They wanted to hire older, seasoned faculty with a lot of background and experiences in particular areas they were interested in, and just bring you in and tell you, run with it, go do your thing. And you create, if you're not real careful about it, particularly if I'm not sure if you hire people that are not the most social people in the world, you can create that sort of sense of aloofness between levels. And, then it begins to break down pretty quickly, the culture. If you have the people who've been there and the people that have come in, and I mean, it can be all kinds of bad stuff. And to App's credit, they've been able to manage that pretty well. I'm not sure, where High Point's going to be with that, because when I was talking about the downturn we're going through, a lot of that money will disappear. When people don't have large pots of disposable monies, and they have to kind of, hoard their millions or whatever, they tend to cut way back on giving. And so they might be willing to put Johnny in a little bit less qualified school if it's half the money or something like that. So you kind of, these things can come back and bite you, but it is, I thought the interesting part of that, and the reason for that example, was the way in which the College of Business had laid out these rules and regulations about how you were supposed to handle things. And yeah, you're supposed to work as hard as the dean, and work as hard as the president, work as hard as, whoever these guys are. And, is that something that you want to do? Is that something that you feel you can do? So it was but in my mind, those are the two ways that you that you really sort of develop a culture in an institution. You do it through vision, and that takes you so far. You know, it doesn't do a whole lot with a lot of detailed stuff, and you're assuming that you've got people on board that are competent and can make things work. Or, and maybe and or you do it with sort of the social contract notion, this idea that, you know, we have certain rules and regs, and we expect certain types of behaviors and certain types of practices, and we just won't accept it any other way. And you can create an organizational structure around that too. So it is a, you know, you have to keep kind of thinking about how best to put things together to really accomplish what you're trying to accomplish with that institution. And you can't be all things to everybody. That's the big mistake. You can't be all things to everybody. You have to use the, you know, kind of use the musical thing. You have to find a lane that you can, you know, that you can work in, the key that works for you and the pace that works for you. And so you have to, you know, whatever organizing model an institution takes on, I mean, it has to be the one that works for that institution in that setting. And yeah, it's a little tough to get done sometimes.
So what would you say then you think, because I know, for example, I went to a liberal arts college, Emory and Henry College, for undergrad, and they have already sent out an email, the president there asking for support for donations because where they're having the prorate room and board. And I mean, it's the first institution that I've seen that's already, they were doing this late last week, and I'm thinking with all of this going on, do you think that in terms of a lot of other private schools or schools, we're going to start seeing more of those kinds of messages in terms of where do you wait in terms of start asking for funds? It's one thing to ask for money like NC State, because I've graduated from there. We have this fund if you want to give to help support students who may be here, who've lost housing, but to start asking for, we want, you know, general fund and we need this money support, because now, you know, so many colleges are riding that line or kind of tied to how much their revenue is. So do you think that that's going to start shifting over the next year? Like,
oh yeah. I mean, the pressures there are going to be enormous, and we're already losing, you know, a fair number of institutions every year. I mean, we have you know, I don't know the number exactly, but I think there's maybe somewhere between 40 and 100 higher ed institutions are closing yearly. Now, some of those have been higher ed institutions in name only, and some of them have been, you know, there to get the Pell Grant money and, you know, student financial aid monies, and, you know, they kind of got caught up in all that, and they, you know, as that's begun to dry up for them, they haven't been able to meet the benchmarks to keep those funds coming. You know, they're just closing their door. And but a lot of them have been institutions like the small private schools, liberal arts schools. I don't know if you remember what happened at Sweetbriar in Virginia over the last couple of years. I mean, they were getting ready to shut it down, and suddenly they found, you know, $5 million worth of donors, and they were able to keep it open. But I think they're headed right back to the same spot because, you know, they wanted to essentially keep the model the way it was, you know, 40 years ago. And, you know, even for a private women's college, that's not what the, you know, the female student of you know, 2020 wants to look like, what the female student may have looked like in 1970 or 1980. And so they're, you know, they're still having a big battle down there in terms of what will be the look of that campus and what will be their organizing theme and what will be their mission and things like that. And so, yeah, I do think it will get really tough on some smaller schools because, you know, they don't have anything to bail them out. You know, state schools always has the state. Now, the state can come along and say, shut down. They tend not to want to do that because there's a political cost to that. Maybe we should be talking politics as opposed to culture here, but there's a political cost to closing colleges. There's a political cost to just look in your local neighborhoods, the big brouhaha you have when you start redistricting elementary schools or high schools, or you take an old school that's 50 years old and you want to take it offline to replace it with a new school, and it's like, oh my God, the tradition, the history, we can't take that offline. But from a pure serving the students better and efficiency point of view, you have to. You can't run an old campus, and expect to provide students the best education. So, you find that there is always a reluctance to give up on something, even when it doesn't make sense to keep it. I knew all those schools, Emory and Henry, and the other small private schools down in Southwest Virginia and up in the Shenandoah Valley, and all those schools that have a particular model. The Murray Baldwin's got a bit more expansive in that they kind of, and Murray Baldwin Stanton was an interesting case because for years they were totally resistant to co-ed education, totally resistant. And then Title IX came in, and Virginia Military Institute lost a court battle and had been told that they were going to have to admit females. And so they got their heads together with Murray Baldwin and submitted an alternative plan, which the courts accepted, which would allow them to accept students, female students, that met the qualifications for enrollment at VMI, except they would enroll at Murray Baldwin and receive state funds to operate what they called VWIL. What did VWIL? Virginia Women's Institute for Leadership. And so they wore the same uniform. They did pretty much the same, drills. They went to the same bivouacs. They went to the, summer skills camps, things, all those sorts of things, except they didn't go back to VMI. They came back to Murray Baldwin. And they were in their own dorm in Murray Baldwin. They were essentially students that were participating in the program at VMI, but they were not students of VMI. They were students of Murray Baldwin. Now, after that, it kind of opened the crack a little bit in terms of co-ed, and a few years that went away when VMI couldn't, and they lost another court battle. And so they had to start admitting female students. And when that happened, then there was no reason to do the VWIL program. So, that program began to dry up pretty quickly. And so Murray Baldwin they had for some time admitted male graduate students into their education programs and leadership programs and things like that. Well, they increased that number. And then last year, as kind of the last, nail in the coffin against the single gender school system, they decided they were going to start a men's soccer and a men's lacrosse team. And so obviously they would need to admit some men to populate the men's soccer and the men's lacrosse teams. They also have women's soccer, women's lacrosse. But they were beginning to get a little pressure under Title IX for not offering the same programs, athletic programs for men that they offered for women. Entirely the opposite of what you had seen all over the country. And so now they have, they have a soccer program, and they have a lacrosse program, and they have a burgeoning class of maybe 200 or 300 male students that began as freshmen this past year, I think. By the way, Murray Baldwin's athletic nickname is the Fighting Squirrels. And so I've been kind of thinking, okay, uh, as a guy, do I want to go play soccer and have my nickname being the Fighting Squirrels? Or what's the upside of that? There's 200 of us and there's 1,200 females. And so they're now beginning to enter, to cross the gender barrier, shut down the whole notion of a single sex campus. And, they're looking for expansion. They're looking to, build a few more buildings and add onto the campus, which would be hard to do because it's right in the middle of Stanton City. And Stanton's an old town with only historic buildings. And so there's not much they can tear down and replace in Stanton. So they're going to have a little problem expanding, but that's what they want to do. But yeah, do I think it'll be tough for private schools? Absolutely. It's going to be a killer for some of them because, the money goes away. And we've had a pretty good run with donors and money for about a decade almost, which is unusual to have that long a period of time with money available for foundations and things like that. And so now we're looking probably, suddenly a lot of that will go away and it won't come back for a few years.
But what about online education? Because you see Liberty University now, granted, they've been in the news for a lot of other reasons with, the virus and their president's stance on things, letting students come back to campus. But do you think, given this happening, because there have been, like Emory and Henry College, I know that they resisted a lot of other four-year schools. High Point University, I've taught there. They have a minute number of online classes prior to this. So could that be a way? Liberty University has thousands of students because years ago they invested and said, we're going to do a lot of online education. So is that going to be the way they could replace maybe donors that may go away for a few years? Because I think even at community college, there are people in my department who, I know somebody who was 2 years from retirement who said, I have to do all of this online now because I'm forced to do it. And I've resisted all these years. I was just trying to coast in, my last 2 years. So I don't know. I'm sure other people in the class are thinking about it, but Liberty, that's how they make a lot of money is off online education. But I'm seeing Emory and Henry, if they don't start expanding, they're not going to make it either. So I don't know. Just my thought.
Yeah, quite possibly. Online creates its own set of troubles. And a lot of it has to do with infrastructure spending and retooling faculty, because it's not just moving crap online. It's understanding the online pedagogy, which is entirely different. Because in the online environment, I do very little. You do everything. Students do it all. Because I'm not there to kind of walk you through it or provide excessive amount of feedback or whatever. You do everything. And so it changes the student role. Now, for some private schools, it may change the student role more than they want to get into. And so they'll resist. They'll resist really hard. Emory and Henry and some of those others, because I'm drawing a blanks on all of them now, but schools like that they put a lot of stock in their social environment and the networking that their students generate while they're there. And so, fraternity programs and sorority programs are big, and, all those things, which really is hard to do if you become more virtual. And so to give up the on-campus experience entirely, or in large part, really might change the whole dynamic and culture of the institution. Now, here's a little secret on Liberty. The reason that they're on the really, 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 really thin edge of bankruptcy, and every time they tip over, they send out a plea and they get 100 donors or 1,000 donors that send them $2 million or whatever, and that money will dry up too. A lot of that will dry up. But the reason that they asked students to come back, invite a student back, because they didn't have the cash balance on hand to refund students. Because they made their money on the online environment. That's their cash flow. That's their cash cow. They lose money on the on-campus environment. They can't pay for that. And so I doubt, they could probably have figured out how to do it, but they'll end up being sued, and they'll end up settling, and they'll end up paying out, but they'll pay out a whole lot less. And they can go to their donors and, plead, we need help, we need help, we need help. All these bad people are trying to get us. And they'll get money. Now, until that money dries up. So it's the on-campus experience. The reason that Liberty went online such a large scale, they show an online enrollment of about 80,000 students. Now, just get your head around that number, 80,000 students. And they're using outdated infrastructure and outdated, programs, but they've still got 80,000 online students. And so that's where they make their money. That's the cash cow. The on-campus money, they don't make anything. They lose money on the on-campus enrollment. And so that's an interesting model, but once again, it's a model that's sustainable when society is flush with cash, but it's a little bit less sustainable when society doesn't have too much. So, but anyhow, I'm rambling. So, somebody else say something.
What I think this whole experience is teaching us, and teaching higher ed too, is about contingency planning and what's gonna, we need to have plans put in place for other than natural disaster crises. So it's interesting to see the evolution in what's going on with this, a crisis like this on this type of scale,
What typically happens in the institution when you have, basically any sort of cash crunch or whatever, because that, ultimately this will be a cash crunch for everybody, because, receipts will go down to state government, and enrollments will flatten out, and, there'll be a lot of things that'll happen over the next year and a half. And so the cash flow environment of all institutions is going to change. And there's going to be all kinds of efficiencies. I imagine I'll get a really nice buyout offer here in a year or so, about the end of this year. And will I take it? I don't know. I might just hang around just to, be the squeaky wheel on the vehicle for a little while. I don't know. If it's nice enough, I'll be gone in a heartbeat. But they will try to dump people like me because we're too expensive. I'm not that expensive, but we're too expensive, and they'll try to hire people at a much lower rate. And so if you can cut your cost of personnel appreciably, 10% or 15% by moving out, older faculty, higher paid faculty, and bringing in younger, newer faculty, that's not a bad way to manage, cash crisis, because it creates, a big part of your budget is always positions. That's the largest part of your budget, actually, positions and benefits. Every institution leaves a bunch of positions vacant every year. I mean, they carry I don't know what App's actual count is, but I suspect there's at least 100 positions at App that are vacant yearly. Now, sometimes you'll transition people through that, but you will just, have positions there that have been allocated by the state. You just don't, hire anybody to do that for various reasons. Maybe you can't find anybody. Maybe you're looking for a particular expertise, and so you just keep the position until you find the person that can do that, or lots of reasons. But almost every institution has these vacant positions that sit out there. And so if you can increase the efficiency of the cost of each position by getting rid of bigger contracts and bringing in smaller contracts, or bringing in non-tenure track people to replace tenure track people, then you have the potential for considerably budget savings, at least in the positions and personnel categories. And those are most expensive parts of your budget anyhow. That's the one that, if you can make cuts there, that's where you'd prefer to make them in some way, because you have to, if you cut other places, you're either cutting infrastructure, or can only not pave the parking lot for so many years, or stuff like that. I mean, you run out of efficiencies at some point in time. But the biggest place to get efficiency is in positions. So if you can cut positions, you'll try to do that in some way. And you'll cut programs. You'll look at programs that are marginal and that don't graduate a lot of people, but are not core programs. Obviously, you wouldn't cut physics or chemistry, because everybody needs physics and chemistry, even though they only graduate about one person every third year. And so how do you look at programs that don't have high number of graduates, and have personnel costs that you can kind of wean away from, or things like that, or you can grant fund something or whatever, shift something from, here's another concept in budgeting: hard money and soft money. Hard money is money that you are committed to in your budget. There's a line in your budget that says this is money we're going to spend. Soft money is money that comes from an outside source, a grant, a project, a gift, that you can use to pay for certain things and not have to tie up hard money. But if you happen to be a person that's on a soft money position, you don't have a whole lot of security there, a whole lot of job security. Large research institutions have as much as 25% of their faculty on soft money. But it's because they have these large grants and these large programs, research programs that are, kind of vital to different industries and Defense Department and whoever else. And so you can't really quit spending that money. But the only reason that those faculty members are there is because that money exists. And if it were to go away, they would go away. So, I mean, as an administrator, as a senior administrator of some sort that has some decisions about priorities and policy and budgets and all that sort of stuff, I mean, you have some tools to play with, but some of those are strictly to, public institutions. That private institutions may not have those tools to work with. And so back to your thought about private institutions, they'll try to do some of the similar things, but they just don't have the same toolbox to play with. It's much harder to run a private school than it is a public school. Questions, thoughts, please? Okay, go ahead.
I work for a program that often gets put up on the chopping block, and we always have to justify, because we're a low incidence program. We prepare teachers of the visually impaired. And so our graduate numbers are always like 10 graduates or less, if that. And so whenever the School of Education wants to do a review of programs that are not performing, we always have to do a massive justification about
Mhm.
there's not many of us in the field to begin with, and that we're not trying to put out enough visual impairments teachers as like reading teachers. So we end up having to do a lot of justification, and basically our programs end up being funded on soft money just to keep existing. So we end
Right.
up with federal grants and all of those, but we're often one that is always having to justify our existence because they're quick to want to cut us.
Yeah, yeah, I know. And there, you know, you can predict it every cycle, and it's kind of like when the downturn occurs, you know they're coming. You know that you'll be the first place they shop. You know they want to just make sure you're doing things. You know the best justification always for programs like that is to look at national demand numbers. And you know if you have professional organizations, or you have even independent organizations that look at demand, need and demand, uh, very often programs like that, uh, there's a high demand for graduates, but there's not a lot of graduates because it's a stressful job.
It's that, and then there's people who don't think about it as a career.
No,
They think of elementary ed teachers, they don't think or they think of special ed, they don't think of vision specifically. But we've gotten pretty good at our verbiage, and we continue to pretty much use it year after year, because we're about to lose 55% of our field to retirement, and we're not replenishing
and
it.
that's the numbers you need. That's the data you take into your justification.
And they estimate that only 2% of students in K through 12 have a visual impairment, but so we're not looking at massive numbers, but so we have all that information that we're getting pretty good at that justification. Yeah. And it tends to be a unique and niche program that the university likes to splash in their newsletters, where they show students out on campus walking around with the canes under blindfold, or we have a cooking lab where we learn how to do daily living skills without vision. So they like to every so often throw out some PR pieces, and that gets some attention. And so having those niche pieces tend to be beneficial too.
Yeah, it makes a much nice visual than an economist.
Yeah. It gives you that warm, fuzzy feeling kind of thing that people and the alumni want to see.
And it is, part of it is about the visual. It's about that image that you're projecting, that the thing you want to do. And this is not the course for that either, but it's, probably the most important man that a president hires, he or she hires when they take the job, is their budget person. That's number one. You got to have somebody that knows the numbers and work the budget. You got to have somebody that kind of knows where all the bodies are buried, and all that sort of stuff. The second most important person they hire is their communications person, PR person, whatever they want to call them, school spokesperson, whatever. That's the second most important, because all it takes is one piece of bad news or one negative story seems to last forever, and it takes about 10 or 12 positive stories to begin to put a dent in one negative story. And so you need, that communication person there, that PR person, whatever you want to call them. You need them creating that story that tells the story you want to tell as an institution. And once again, that's the reason you have to be centered around something. You have to have a lane that you're in. And that's what you stress. And you tell good stories, and you tell your heartwarming stories, and you show lots of students. Don't show faculty. Nobody wants to see faculty. They don't want to see administrators. They want to see students. Show them students. Show them, kids on campus. You want to highlight your multicultural campus. Show a bunch of kids down in the student union, a multicultural group of students enjoying each other and laughing it up and studying together. And what you do is you create the visual, create the image that you want them to see. And then realizing that you're going to have some other stuff that you can't control. It will show up. And then you do damage control as best you can. But you're always trying to redirect. You're trying to get the image flipped around as much as you can. and get a redirection so you're back telling what you want to tell. And that person is very, very, very important. You got to have somebody that knows what they're doing there. If you don't, you're losing a lot of potential positives that you can kind of tap into. But it is, you know, it's difficult. It's hard to kind of weather some of these things. And you have to look at institutions, and you realize that the budget cycles are going to go up and down. They always do. They always will. You know, this is my third recession, I guess, in higher ed, which I would call a real recession, in which, you know, I can remember the last recession, whenever it was, you know, right at the end of Bush and right at the beginning of Obama, when everything kind of crashed. And it wasn't a big one. It was just a little crash. It bottomed out everything, and jobs went away and all that sort of stuff. We got a request from the president's office that we needed to build two budgets. One was a 50% cut on operational budget, and the other one was a 66% cut on operational budget. And we had to accomplish that cut. This came in like very beginning of school in the fall semester. We had to accomplish that cut over the period of the academic year. So we went into the year with a budget in mind, then the bottom fell out of everything. And then we got a memo, we had to look at 50% cut and a 66% cut. And, you know, I was, you know, at the time, still in the institutional research and institutional effectiveness job at the community college. And that's where this cut was. And so my job, by the beginning of the next week, I had to project what enrollment we could sustain with those particular cuts. And so, you know, I did. I just ran hard numbers, and basically, if we had to cut 66%, we had 6 or 8 programs that were on the chopping block, and we would have to kind of wean away somehow 600-700 students. And, you know, so we began making plans for that. Fortunately, we didn't have to. The state decided to tap its rainy day fund and almost wipe it out rather than make all these big cuts like that. But we were in the process of making the cuts for the next year when I left. And that had maybe a little something to do with that, you know, because I had some ideas that I was very interested in putting in place at the community college, and it just wasn't going to be available to do. And I was going to be doing really bad projections and really bad news for people for about 6 months. So yeah, something else came along. Okay, that's fine. Let somebody else do the bad stuff, because got you this far. But it is, you know, it is this sort of thing you have to deal with. Any thoughts while I do a quick read on this chat over here? I still haven't developed the ability to be able to, you know, do this and read the chat thing yet. I have to put both eyes on the same thing. Yeah, online presence. I agree. We're going to have to do more of that because it has an efficiency to it, but there's a lot going there. There's a lot of issues there. Will there be more? That's an interesting question. Will there be less students at universities in the fall and more at community colleges? I don't know. It's kind of interesting. I mean, I can build a logic both ways. And then I can build a logic that'll just be less students, period. And then I could build a logic that there'll be more students in both.
I think one of the biggest things is going to see what the economic impact ends up being, because this could devastate some families' abilities for students to go, or even students to be self-supporting if they've been unemployed through all of this.
Yeah, and what you may find, and you know, there's going to be a series of economic recovery packages. This first one with, you know, the nice little check that shows up in your checking account. This first one is really just kind of a, let's get over the hump. Let's not explode. Let's get over the hump if we can. It's interesting that this idea of a universal payment sounds very similar to this notion that the technology folks are all, and different investment folks have been talking about for quite a while, of a universal national income. Because there are people that are employed now that have been unemployed for a long time. And, you know, this will actually be a tick up for them, because they'll get this, you know, little infusion of money. It'll be money that they never had before. And so I suspect there's going to be some momentum toward thinking about a guaranteed national income, simply because, you know, we're automating and high-teching and moving jobs to different places around the world. A lot of people out of the employment market altogether. I mean, they're never going to come back. There's never going to be a you know, a basic furniture factory built in the Triangle area of North Carolina. And so those couple of million people got laid off there that didn't get another job. I mean, where are they going to go? What are they going to do? Now they're just kind of hanging out until they can draw Social Security and things like that. So it's, you know, there is this idea that we're going to have changes, and there's going to be other parts to this package that probably get rolled out in 2 or 3 installments. And some, you know, some congressmen and some senators are going to be dragged kicking and screaming into it, but there's no other way. I'm not so sure at the end of the tunnel there won't be an increased activity in student financial aid and a certain movement toward canceling existing student debt. That's the quickest way of putting money back into an individual's pocket outside of just giving them cash. If you pull the, you know, the student debt that they're laboring under away from them, then suddenly they're making a little bit more money if they still have a job. And so I think there'll be some initiatives like that that you'll see in these packages. I would not be surprised, and this has been the trend in the past. This is the trend that's been in the past. I will not be surprised if enrollment doesn't go up in the fall, particularly at 2-year schools, but also at fairly stable, strong 4-year schools. Because they'll find sources of student financing. The institutions will, the bigger institutions, and it might be a more viable way for some people to do, instead of look for a job that's not going to be there. It's not going to be paying them what they need to live, as opposed to going on you know, low interest student financing for going back to school or improving their you know, their skill set or something like that. So I think there'll be an education piece to this that may very well look at, you know, peeling away student debt a bit, or doing away with it altogether. I mean, it's like, look at this bill, it's $2 trillion. You could cancel existing student debt for less than 50 billion.
Another thing that I think it hasn't been brought up, and I had to step away for a second, but The idea of, having college students. I know my daughter is curious if her summer internship will exist. And, what does that look like? She would be returning to her summer internship for the second year, and are there even going to be those opportunities? We're assuming very likely not, but the income piece for students, I think, is going to be huge, because my children are on academic scholarships and other scholarships as well. So, that's a huge impact for our family if something would change.
Yeah, and some of those things will probably change because for various reasons you may not be able to do internships this summer because, yeah, quite frankly, folks, if you're looking for being out of this soup in a month, it's not going to happen. We're going to be well into the summer. In fact, I was just thinking, I saw your baseball backdrop there, Mitchell, and I was just thinking, wonder if I'm going to even get to see a baseball game this summer. Right now, I'm thinking if they even play baseball, it'll be July or August before they'll play a 40-game season or something like that, because it's just, you're not going to, a virus operates on its own schedule, and because we didn't handle it particularly well to begin with, it's going to be with us for a while. We were just told here, the governor in Virginia, our governor, who'd been a little reluctant to do this. He had a kind of a stay home advisory. Well, now he has issued a stay home executive order through June 10th.
My daughter told me that on a walk right before our class. Mom, did you hear about Virginia?
Yeah, and this is a very data. He's a doctor, so he was a pediatric surgeon and all those sorts of things. So he's a doctor, so he's very data driven, and he doesn't make rash decisions, and he does all of those things outside of the blackface thing a few years ago. But any sorority, any fraternity guy that gets drunk enough will do pretty much anything against his own judgment. But he's a very rational guy, very, deliberate sort of decision maker. And he said best evidence right now that he was looking at, that he would be reluctant to think that we could get back to normal in any way, shape, or form, or even semi-normal before the middle of June. And so, if you thought sheltering in place for 15 days would be good, or for a month would be good, let's go for 3. Let's see how crazy we can all be after being home with our family, primarily for 3 months. And I don't know. We just had our first delivery from Walmart today. Oh my God! They got it right. And Chewy is supposed to show up later this week. Our pets are praying for that. So, this is a kind of a new world we're embarking on. But yeah, I don't know what will happen with programs like internships and student teachings and things like that. I think we're on hold for 2 semesters. I really do. I think we're on hold for 2 semesters, and academic administrators on campus today at App were told to begin to make preliminary plans to be primarily virtual and online in the fall too. Because unless we come up with a vaccine or an effective treatment, we'll probably get another cycle of this in the fall. It'll probably roll through. There'll be some herd immunity developed, and then essentially, kind of percolate out and start up again, not with the force that's the first time, because there are some people that are immune now that have had it and survived. In fact, 80% of the people that had it have survived. And 60% of them didn't even know they had it. And so there is a certain herd immunity. But it will be back until we actually have a vaccine for it. Because there's nothing, it's a perfect virus, perfect, you know, secret killing machine, because it can, you know, pass through a neighborhood and make 10 people infect 20 people, and 16 or 18 doesn't even know they've had it. I mean, they had a little cough or something and it went away, and, you know, 4 people die. So it's, in that regard, it's a perfect silent killing machine. And so they think he'll be back. They think that, you know, early fall, he'll likely be back. And so we'll be operating in some strange scenarios, I would say, for the best part of the next year or so. And that's just what we have to do. You just deal. I had a really great mentor once that said, you know, you can only deal with what's right in front of you. You can only deal with what you're looking at, what's right in front of you. And you can't worry about what, you know, have you done this or didn't wish you'd done that or whatever. Got to deal with what's in front of you first. And you know, there'll be plenty of time for hindsight and debriefing and, you know, the blame game. But I think a perfect example of that sort of model is if you look at Cuomo up in New York. I mean, you know, that guy's got to be crying blood, you know, when he's off by himself, but he's managing a train wreck that you can do absolutely nothing about except try to keep the count down best you can. But, you know, other thoughts. Yeah, the finance class will be kind of interesting unless he decides to go a different direction with in terms of the debate about, you know, what to fund and you know, whether you can make big changes and use the critical theory model, you know, to make the changes you want to make. I'm not sure the critical theory model is going to work too well right now. You just got to keep the boat afloat right now is basically the model you got to do. So it's a different world. But you can't give up thinking ahead. I mean, you do have to think ahead. But, you know, that's your second mission right now. Your first mission is just, you know, get through what's in front of you best you can. Other thoughts about culture and this crisis and what we all should be doing?
Kind of going off a lot of the different things that have been said, but I'm part of the leadership at my school, and so I'm at a pre-K through grade 8 school, and basically every day we're taking the feedback. The majority has been positive, but there, you know, are lots of there is a lot of negative feedback too. But I would say, you know, it's much less, thank goodness, as we quickly rolled out distance learning. But taking that negative feedback or taking whatever feedback and just always reframing it, like you said. You know, I had a parent that emailed today and just sharing, you know, thank you so much for your valuable feedback and important feedback as we, you know, work to continue our mission and meet the needs of the whole, you know, child, the whole student. So, you know, I work directly with the director of curriculum, or I'm the director of curriculum. Hello, I work directly with myself. No, that's how much I'm not sleeping. No, I work with the director of communications and my principal, and I'm the director of curriculum. And so it's just always taking, it's like dirt's coming, but just finding new ways to give people hope that you're hearing them and that we're tweaking things and we're adjusting things. And even if we're not going to do it exactly how they want us to do it, we're still listening and we're still taking it in and valuing their perspective while staying true to our mission. And so
Yeah, you have to give people the right and the ability to vent. I mean,
Mhm.
if you want to get in kind of in this line of work, you really, I don't say you have to have thick skin. You just have to realize that they're not yelling at you; they're yelling at the circumstances.
I think you have to have some thick skin.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. You know, it works best if you do, but
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
It like you said, it works better if you do, because exactly.
yeah, because it's the circumstances. I mean, they're confronted with the same circumstances you're confronted with, except they're dealing with it on a more personal level because it's their child. And so there is always a tinge of emotion when you're talking about your kids. I mean, you can't talk about your kids without getting emotional.
Yeah.
And
Well, and I
yeah,
think too, sometimes they're like today I spoke with two different people and their frustrations were very legitimate.
yeah, and you do
Honestly,
what you do. Yeah,
yeah, so then you're problem solving to figure out
yeah,
how to, bring the teacher up to the point where she's can do the distance learning in a manner that is not going to aggravate on a daily basis
yeah.
the students and the parents. And, you know, and that can be challenging.
Yeah, it's you know, the what they pay administrators to do is essentially sit back and enjoy themselves most of the time, but then problem solve when they have to. I mean, that's why they give them the big office and nice chairs and all that sort of stuff, because there will come a time when they'll earn every bit of that, because they'll have to problem solve their way out of something. And you expect them to do that. You expect them to get you in a better circumstance on the other side when you're done. And so it is a matter of thinking about what's in front of me. How do I solve this? What can I do, or what can I do, and what can I do? You have to understand what you can't do either.
Yeah.
All right,
Well,
folks. I'm getting ready to wrap up here because I think I've recorded as much as I can, and I'm gonna have to turn off this recording. We could always start another one, but you know, uh, we might be recircling back around to the same conversations again, which is fine. If you need to vent, you need to vent. That's good. Next week we will deal into some more of the diversity issues. The kind of following up on the culture of schools. We'll look at it as it relates to kind of gender issues and other cultural issues. There is an awful lot of debate about genderedness in higher ed, and so we have to acknowledge that that's sort of playing out there now. It might go on the back burner for a little while because of the immediate concerns of just keeping the lights on and keeping things moving forward and providing some benefit for students. But it's not going to go away. It's still going to be there. And as we get time, we'll come right back to it, and we'll debate and argue and spend time on some of these diversity issues. I still contend one of the biggest threats of this whole thing is that as we go to a distance learning model or an online model in an emergency sort of scenario, we will kind of reinforce those gaps that exist among student populations. And kids that have resources and parents that have resources, their kids will get through this and they'll do fine. But kids whose parents don't have resources and whose parents can't really help them that much anyhow, with tutoring or things like that, they won't be so good. And so we'll have to figure out how to mediate that or mitigate that over the next few years, because that's what we're looking as happening coming out of this. And once again, another problem solving. Think 5 years down the line, how do we get back what we lost and move forward? And so we're gonna have to shrink and retrench a little bit in lots of things, but doesn't mean we have to quit thinking about what needs to be priorities and what we should be doing in the future. And so we have to kind of always keep the two tracks going. And it's not what's happening right now is not what wakes me up at night. What's happening right now, what's going to happen in 10 years or 15 years, when my granddaughter is going through school or getting into college, that's what I worry about. That's what wakes me up at night, because I want those places to be better. Yeah. And they will be. They will be, because there are a lot of people kind of like me that, let's see what we can build out of this mess. Sometimes it's the best time to build something out of chaos, out of a, knock the building down and then you can build a better one, sort of thing. So we'll see how it goes. Okay, folks, I'll be less philosophical as time goes along. I'm sorry about that. That's just my way my brain works. We do have, I will get that feedback to you, and I'm so sorry. I just, this past week was a, kind of a personal zoo around here. So we managed to get everything settled down, and now we know we have a logistic flow of supplies from Walmart and Chewy. I mean, we can live, so we'll see how we get along. I will see you next week. We're going to talk about the gender stuff. I'll send out a little bit more information about the paper you should be thinking about, and give you feedback on the previous one. Don't expect earth-shaking, large-scale feedback, because these are thought process papers. These are not papers that there's a right answer, that you hit it right on the nail or whatever. It's more about your thought process and how you get, what's the logic of how you get from A to B, and things like that. So most of the feedback will be along those lines, along with some grammatical stuff if I see it or whatever. I'm not going to dwell on trying to find that stuff, but just to get the thought process people squared away a little bit. All right, folks, have a great week.
You.
Stay safe. Wash your hands, just do all that good stuff, and in the interest of building a better world, stay away from people. That sounds wrong, it just sounds wrong. But in the interest of building a better world, let's all get together and stay away from people. Okay, so y'all have a good one, and I'll see y'all next week.